Welcome, everyone. It's nice to see so many people today.
Thank you.
It is 11:40, and I am officially opening this quarterly commissioners meeting for the New York City Commission on Human Rights. Welcome. As I think all of you know, I'm Carmelyn P. Morales. I'm the chair for the commission, and I'm very excited that we have several new people who have joined the commission. I'm hoping folks have seen the press release that went out, is it yesterday or the day before yesterday?
A couple of days ago.
A couple of days ago. But since we have a few new people, and so all of you can have a sense of where you're coming from, why don't we start today by going around the table so folks can introduce themselves? And it would be great too if you could talk about your different borough affiliations as well. So meaning like where you live, where you work, etc., as well as the work that you're engaged in community. Is that okay? Fantastic. Terry, you want to start?
Hi, I'm Terry. I know a lot of people here. I'm from Staten Island. I'm a native Staten Islander. I know there's not a lot of us left, but
There may not be any left.
there may not be New Yorkers.
That's right.
But I live on the, raised on the North Shore of Staten Island, live on the North Shore of Staten Island within view of the harbor. And I have been serving homeless people since 1984. And prior to that, I was a human rights worker in Central America. And I'm a pastor, and I pastor a church on the South Shore of Staten Island, spitting distance to the Outer Bridge Crossing, Huguenot Park Reformed Church. My affiliations are, I work with an organization called Communities United for Respect and Trust, which is an anti-bias group. We're in our 15th year. Staten Island Immigrants Council, co-founder of El Centro del Migrante, which is a day labor organization, first such on Staten Island and run by day laborers. I don't know, a bunch of other things. Anyway, it should be, there's a paragraph somewhere. And I'm happy to be here. There's also a Girl Scout.
Wow.
That's important.
Yes. And I'll also just say that Reverend Terry is no stranger to the work of the commission, and she's actually been, even before she became a commissioner, just a fantastic partner, frankly, in a lot of the work we do, especially the interfaith work that we do and the immigrant rights work that we've been doing, not just in Staten Island, but around the city. So I'm so delighted that you're joining the commission.
All right, thank you.
I'm Oliveira from the Young Men's Foundation. I'm not a commissioner, and we do well when we fund people like Terry and other activists. That's what we do. You're kind of a legend.
That's bad. I mean, I'm old enough to be a legend.
but since it beats the alternative, it's good to be a legend as well.
Thank you.
Nice. You're in Borough. Do you want to say anything
Oh,
about
New
where
York
you are?
City wide.
Okay.
Citywide.
Yeah.
Well. Hi, I'm Rocky Chin. I'm glad to be here in person. I was on the screen, I guess, which is really hard to connect.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so I'm a new commissioner. I actually worked here many years ago, so it's kind of interesting to come back here and run into people who are still here, and fun to come back. I worked at the Human Rights Commission from '85 through towards the end, almost around 2000. I took a break, ran for office in the year that our mayor ran also. That just puts me in that same category when he first got city council. I didn't make it. We had a big interruption, as you know, in September 11th. I went back to work after a couple of years of caregiving a relative at the State Division of Human Rights, and then went through several governors, and was the director of what we call the Office of Equal Opportunity and Diversity, which is throughout kind of the Human Rights Commission and also State Division. I addressed a number of things besides being, of course, a prosecuting attorney and investigator and so forth. One of which is our disability work and also immigrant rights work, so I'm really happy. And language. Some of you might be surprised that when I first started the Human Rights Commission, which was over here on Wayne Street, I said, what are the steps here? How does somebody get in? They said, oh, they have to go through the back, through the freight elevator. I said, where's the language material? They said, we have a few things in Spanish, but not that much. So that shows how far we've come. I mean, that was ridiculous. And somebody would call me and say, oh, here's a Chinese person, I don't speak Chinese very well, so can you translate for me? So those were really experiences, and it reflects kind of where New York City government was at too, so I think this has been a big challenge. I live in the Lower East Side. I've worked with a number of groups here. The New York Immigration Coalition is a dear coalition that I know, and other people. We actually helped start it. A lot of us who were here in the city at the time, it was actually a city initiative. And I also worked with the Chinese and the Asian community, but other communities. I'm really happy to be part of this mission.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Carrie Davis. I go by she and her. I live in Brooklyn, and I work citywide. My first connection with the commission, I'm not a new commissioner, I've been working with you all since 2017, but my first connection goes back to 1998 when I helped found an organization to create legislation that we wanted to pass in the city to change the human rights law to include protections for gender identity and expression, which we did finally in 2002. And I've been connected with the commission in a variety of ways since then, and I was so happy to join the commission in 2017. My work right now, I've worked a lot in LGBT health and human services, HIV and substance use. I have a particular focus around the needs of transgender, gender non-binary individuals. I primarily work as a consultant now. Doing a lot of work around strategic planning, program planning, organizational development, board development, things of those nature.
Oh, so I'm Bishop Gonzalez. I'm an educator. I live in Brooklyn and an advocate for the safety of transgender students. So I have decided that a part of my mission is to make sure that children that are transgender are safe. They have a safe place to be educated and to be protected.
My name is Gurdev Singh Kang. I'm living also Staten Island almost 35 years. But usually I have connected with the Queens because we have a place of worship. It's Sikh Culture Society in Queens. I was the former president and still the coordinator of the committee. But I came to know the first time, the Sikh community is heavily populated in Queens. And we are the people who get mostly the hate crime victims at the time after the 9/11. So since then we involved a little bit of our Honorable Mayor Blasio when he first tried run for the primary. And then we are very proud, we have last week, we have our first guru, the birthday 550, which was celebration all over the world. Our Honorable Mayor came to our place of worship in Sikh Culture Society on Sunday, 17. Even our all elected official from the Queens, our sister, our district attorney, which coming to be Linda Katz, she's the borough president. She came at the day too. When we are working with our behalf of the Sikh community, because Sikh community is a newly immigrated to this country. And a lot of people, whoever they came in New York and JFK, the lander, the first one they know where the Gurdwara Sikh Culture Society because they affiliated with their school children going to over there. And then we are mostly people sit around the different state, but first they come in New York. And I'm the clergy liaison with One Police Plaza because I'm working with the 1 or 2 precincts at the time and then One Police Plaza. And now I'm the member of the Mayor Advisory Faith Committee, which one we have a meeting today, but they was cancelled at 6 o'clock, but we have a topic on hate crime. So usually the Sikh community is working with all the communities and like a religious faith, and we are targeting because we are description of looking, But once the people came to know who are the Sikhs, and now we are very friendly with each one. Especially on the 550, she's my colleague from Pakistan, originally. The Pakistan opened the corridor, Kartarpur. You see even the both nuclear powers, but they are friendly with the Sikh community. They give us permission to visit our Des Gurdwara Sahib without visa. We don't need visa through the corridor. So we are very friendly all over the world, and I'm a successful businessman with the real estate.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Greenspun. I have been with the Commission since November of 2014. I have lived in 3 out of the 5 boroughs. I've born and raised in Brooklyn, lived in Manhattan for a short stint. I currently reside in the Northwest Bronx. I went to school in Queens, so I guess you could check that box. And as far as Staten Island, both my brother-in-laws are from Staten Island. From New York City, right? Still around. I spent 11 years in government, 6 with New York State, where I served in a community affairs capacity with former governor. From 2002 to 2006, I was commissioner of the mayor's community affairs unit. So community relations and community affairs has been part of my career for a good part of certainly all of my government service. Since leaving government, I serve on the board of the executive committee of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. I'm also a former president and current trustee of my local synagogue, and also on some other boards like the New York League of Conservation Voters. So it's a pleasure to be with you this morning, and welcome to all the new members. And let me just apologize in advance. I may have to leave a bit early, and so I apologize to those for having to miss part of the meeting.
I'm Guillermo Chacon. I'm with the Latino Commission on AIDS. I spend weekdays in the Bronx. Have been my home since I moved from El Salvador here. And my connection with the Human Rights Commission, actually my boss and mentor, who is investing in peace and empower, Dennis De Leon, used to be the Human Rights Commission. When I met him, actually, original, he was the commissioner. Before I was employed by the commission, and being from El Salvador, Dennis was always concerned about human rights violations in El Salvador and Central America. And in 2 occasions, we were this close to take him down there, but the city also was going through a very tough times, if you remember those days. And he left that capacity, and then he was hired as a second president of the Latino Commission on AIDS. I called him and I said, I'm back from Central America. I was working down there when I met him, and he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm coming here in the Bronx. I'm gonna be here for a while. I need you to work for me. He hired me in May '95, and I've been at the commission. Unfortunately, Dennis passed. Board hired me, and I've been doing that job citywide, statewide, regional, and national. We have been expanding our presence in the South, by the way. In human rights, in the Deep South, a whole different approach, I would say. I have several affiliations. I'm very proud to serve in the board of New York Immigration Coalition, New York City AIDS Memorial. We built a memorial, finally, for over 100,000 New Yorkers who passed due of HIV and AIDS. And I also serve in the Latino Jewish Coalition. I'm very proud to be part of that space. And I'm a committed human rights individual, and also a a community organizer as a good vehicle to always put community first and produce results and changes in our community. That's it.
Thank you, welcome. And since you mentioned Dennis De Leon, I will say, we currently have 3 conference rooms. We're sitting in the Eleanor Holmes Norton conference room, who is, of course, our former chair and commissioner. We have a Sylvia Rivera conference room upstairs, and we have another conference over here that is named also after Dennis De Leon.
Very nice.
Yes.
Very nice.
Very nice.
Hello, everybody, and special welcome to all the new members. My name is Faiza Patel, and I work at the Brennan Center for Justice, which is a think tank and advocacy organization, so doing something a little bit different. But I come to this table, I think, mainly because of the work that I've done over the years on surveillance of Muslim communities, which was at a high during Mayor Bloomberg. I noticed he didn't apologize for that when he apologized for stop and frisk. But mainly what I do is a lot of research and advocacy. We work very closely with a number of community groups, both here in New York, but really across the nation. And my focus over the last several years has been really on how technology intersects with human rights. And our focus is mainly on national security and policing, but creeps into other areas as well, where I think we're really seeing kind of a a transformation of the human rights space with the use of new technologies and algorithms, which often kind of hide bias and appear to be neutral. So that's really what I've been focused on. And of course, in the last 3 years, given the sort of steps taken by this administration, we've been working a great deal on immigration issues, but mainly on sort of, again, the intersection of how technology is used to fuel the deportation machine and the other kinds, and the decisions being taken in keeping people out of the country through visa vetting programs and the like. So that's really my focus, and I've been really pleased with my time in the commission. I've learned lots of new things, and I'm sure you guys will too.
Thank you. Thanks, Vincent. So welcome to everyone. We don't usually go around the room and do introductions, but there was enough new people around. This commission works so well because I think we try to, internal to our staff, but then also with the commissioners, really work as a team. So I always think it's worth it for all of you to have a sense of each other's perspectives and where you're coming from and how we could be relying on each other and leveraging people's different relationships and communities. So thank you for taking the time to do that. There are some other commissioners who are unfortunately missing from today's meeting. But you can see the full list of all the commissioners and some information on their background on the website. I think Kathy Alvisa is coming, she's just coming late. We are joined right now also by a bunch of commission staff and some guests from the public who are also in the room. And just a reminder to everyone that our meetings are always open to the public. And we're taping them because they're also then posted on our website. Also by rules of the city as a commission, and so anything we say here is then put out publicly. Okay, we're going to start off with a few departmental updates so you have a sense of what we've been up to internally. I'm going to kick off with Dana Sussman, who's one of our deputy commissioners.
Hi everyone. I'll shift over here just so people don't have to awkwardly put their backs to others. Welcome to the new commissioners. Sorry. I'm Dana Sussman, Deputy Commissioner for Intergovernmental Affairs and Policy. I will keep this brief because I know we have a lot to chat about today. We had our biggest announcement since we last convened was our legal enforcement guidance on immigration status and national origin. I'm happy to just toggle through here and pull it up for you.
And this is also in your folders, by the way.
Okay, that's going to be harder to do, so I will rely on the fact that it's in your folders with a one-pager that summarizes. It's a lengthy document. It's technical in some respects because local law interacts with federal law on immigration, as we all know. But the highlights are on that one-pager. About 2 weeks before we planned to launch our legal enforcement guidance on immigration status, one of our cases through the Law Enforcement Bureau that was litigated through Sapna's team went to trial through the administrative trial process. The first case that we're aware of where a tenant was being harassed by their landlord and threats to ICE, threats about calling ICE on someone who had not stable immigration status were being made by the landlord because she had owed rent. And we had explicitly included in our guidance that weaponizing ICE or the police even with the intent to harass or intimidate a tenant or an employee or a customer would be a violation of the city human rights law based on immigration status or national origin. We were, I like to say we were scooped by our own law enforcement bureau in that case made major national news in that it was the first time we think that this was applied in the housing context. It's clearly been established in the employment context that you can't, that undocumented workers or workers of any immigration status can't be harassed based on or required to work in exploitative situations based on threats to call ICE, but it hadn't yet been applied in the housing context. The administrative law judge issued $17,000 or recommended $17,000 in penalties and damages. And that case is now before the Office of the Chair for final decision and order. A couple weeks after that, we issued our legal enforcement guidance, which was a nice sort of through line to continue this conversation at the city level around protections based on immigration status and national origin. One of the highlights that got a lot of attention was the fact that we described the use of terms like illegal alien with the intent to demean or humiliate or threaten or embarrass could be a violation of the city human rights law. That's the harassment standard that we've had for a long time.
Within the context.
Within the context of certain relationships, employee, employer, tenant, landlord, customer, business. We know that got a lot of attention because people kind of raised, First Amendment concerns, but again, our message is that their civil rights laws have established over decades that certain terminology is not acceptable in the workplace or in, the housing context, and that language evolves over time. So there might have been terms that were used 20, 30, 40 years ago that people might not deem harassing, but today, or demeaning, but today our standards have evolved. And so similarly, in this climate, we felt it was very important, and we are litigating those cases and investigating those cases where, again, the use of the terms within those relationships with the intent to demean or humiliate or harass or threaten could be a violation of the city human rights law. We also talk about the interaction between federal law and city law. Federal law governs who has work authorization and who can be employed. Employers have an obligation not to hire people without work authorization. If they choose to hire someone without work authorization, that person in the workplace cannot be treated less well because of their immigration status. It's not a license to exploit or pay less or withhold wages or harass or intimidate. So we wanted to be very clear about that interaction. If you have further questions on it, I'm happy to answer that, but that's sort of our headline for this quarter.
I'm going to make a few notes on this as well, which is that, one, this is really in line, I think, with our prior work of trying to address in legal enforcement guidance what we think are powerful provisions specific to the New York City human rights law, meaning that immigration status is a specific category of protection under our law. It does not exist as a category of protection in most other jurisdictions. In most other jurisdictions, people try to make those claims under national origin or race or in other contexts, or religion or in other contexts, and have to somewhat contort their facts or their claims in order to fit those categories of protection. In New York City, and this is something that goes back to the Koch administration, actually. Immigration status has been under our law. I think it's been under enforced.
Yeah.
It's been under enforced in prior decades. And sadly, because of where we are today, because of national rhetoric on immigration, we're finding that there's just such import in highlighting this area of our law. Dana and I were at a conference of other international and local and other nationally based human rights agencies from around the country. And when we were talking about immigration status, we saw pens rapidly writing. So I fully expect other jurisdictions are also going to follow the lead on this. I mean, there's a smattering of other jurisdictions that do include immigration status. But I do expect that we're going to see this type of category of protection coming up in other jurisdictions nationally. So, I think as many of you know, what we try to do here is kind of incubate what we can do because of our powerful law in the hopes that other jurisdictions will also follow, while also, having, of course, the local significance it does here in New York City because of all of the different immigrant communities here in New York City. The other note I'm going to make on this is very interesting, follows very much, in 2015 we released legal enforcement guidance on discrimination based on gender identity and gender expression for much the similar reasons at that time. We released that guidance at a time when there had been over 20 anti-trans bills that were introduced nationally attacking transgender communities in different areas of life. And we said, okay, we have New York City protections, they're vibrant, they're strong, we're going to lay out how we interpret the law in our jurisdiction. And also in that legal enforcement guidance, which is now informal rules under the Commission, we also identified how intentionally, dead naming or misgendering people could also constitute violations of our law if it's done with the intent to harass, demean, intimidate, etc. within the context of housing, employment, places of public accommodation. And very similarly to what we saw here people came out, how can you tell me what I can do? How can you tell me how I can talk and what I can say to people, and I could say whatever I want to say to people. And of course, we have great love for the First Amendment. And we consider a lot of human rights to be kind of the progeny of First Amendment protections. But also just making it clear to folks that within certain defined relationships, like Dana was talking about, in the housing context, in the employment context, when you're accessing public accommodations, that there is well-recognized limitations to what you can say because of the public policy behind also creating harassment-free, discrimination-free climates in those spaces. So I just wanted to kind of put that out for you. And if you do have questions, we'd be happy to answer them right now.
Just a quick one. A lot of times I hear the word "you illegal." No one says the word alien.
Mm-hmm.
Is that covered under this concept?
I think, yes, when, based on the context.
Based on the
Yeah.
embarrassed attempt to demean, humiliate?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in much the same way in the context, I would say, again, of employment, if somebody is saying, hey, if somebody is creating a hostile work environment based on gender or sexual harassment and someone's using words like girl or honey or whatever, these are commonly used words that in general parlance doesn't discriminate or doesn't harass, but so context really matters.
Mm-hmm.
Being in a defined relationship matters, that we've talked about, and context really matters.
And then I'll just quickly update you on our team also handles the testimony before City Council for either oversight hearings or bills. We've been busy, not surprisingly. The latest one was earlier this week, Monday. We had a hearing on including domestic workers under the city human rights law, an explicit carve-in for domestic workers to be protected in all areas of discrimination in employment. Right now, we have a 4-employee minimum for employment cases, with the exception of gender-based harassment. The 4-employee minimum was eliminated last year as part of a broader sexual harassment bill package. So now domestic workers are protected based on gender-based harassment. This bill, which is a reintroduction of a bill that we testified on in 2015, so it's been around a while, would explicitly bring domestic workers into protection in all areas: hiring, firing, retaliation, accommodations where it's available, and harassment under all protected categories for employment. So we testified in support on Monday. There was a really big, a lot of organizers. It was that we actually had to switch rooms to the larger city council hearing room because there were so many people there to testify and to support it. So I anticipate that will move forward. We also recently testified on several additions to our law in the housing discrimination context. I think in light of rent reform in Albany, there's the possibility that being on the housing, the quote-unquote tenant blacklist, could be use of that could be prohibited in housing. Some other sort of credit requirements for housing might be coming through on the city level. That's all we're very much still negotiating, drafting, and thinking through that with our partners at HPD, at Housing Preservation and Development. I'm trying to think, there's been so many. Age. We had a big one on age discrimination, 4 or 5 bills seeking to address age discrimination, which is going to be, I will preview, a focus for our team in the next months and probably into most of 2020. We've been working I just came from a meeting with the Brookdale Center at Hunter College on Aging, thinking through testing on testing age discrimination to enforce it, training requirements, posting requirements, other things that we might be able to use to address age discrimination in employment. And we are hoping to issue legal enforcement guidance on age discrimination in employment early next year. So we've been busy on the testimony front. We will also be joining a hearing next Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, on an oversight hearing on resources and rights for trans and gender non-conforming and non-binary folks in the city. 2 of our, not me, Chanel Lopez, our trans communities liaison, and Demoya Gordon, one of our supervising attorneys, will be testifying at that hearing next week to talk just a little bit about the work that we're doing in partnership with some other city agencies.
Want to speak a little bit about the work?
Yes, sorry, just going back to the immigration status guidance. I know that you guys keep track of your enforcement actions and the complaints that come to you. I'm sorry that I don't know the details of that, but is there some way to kind of at some point get a grasp of the kinds of cases and the kinds of complaints that are coming through on this? Just, you know, I think you guys have done a good job of like narrowing with the intent requirement, and obviously, as you pointed out, the particular situations where it applies. But if you sort of, it would be, I think, useful to maybe a year and a half, 2 years down the road to get a sense of like what's coming through, like what are the kinds of fact patterns that you guys are seeing, and you know what is the volume, et cetera. I think that would be really kind of a helpful piece on this.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Again, to crystallize for people the kinds of cases we're investigating, the kinds of cases that are coming to us. I think similarly with the hair guidance that we issued earlier this year, we had, I think, 6 or 7 cases at the time. That number has since increased since we issued the guidance, not surprisingly.
Right.
And so also kind of tracking the effectiveness, you know, if we're measuring effectiveness by more cases coming with those kinds of claims as well.
Right, and just to get a sense of what the fact patterns might be like.
Yeah.
I think
In order also probably to quell some of the anxiety that's been raised
exactly.
in the First Amendment context. I always look at FISA when we're talking First Amendment, so, yes.
We're looking at the 2020, what's in the pipeline, religious accommodation, is that all?
Yes, so we, Gurjot Kaur, one of our, the members of our team, one of the senior policy councils, Will, is actually going on parental leave, but she is our resident expert on religious freedom and religious discrimination, and she is bestowing me with her latest draft, which then I will carry forward into 2020. So those two, age and religion, are two of our, are what we're hoping to tee up for 2020 on guidance specifically.
Do you want to speak to some of the work we're doing with the newly created Mayor's Office of Hate Crimes Prevention?
Sure, yes. As many folks may know, the mayor announced the appointment of Deborah Lauder to oversee them, or to direct the mayor's office to prevent hate crimes. We have been in regular communication with her and have met with her many times. Other folks on my team have been part of those conversations, or not my team, on our team, collective team, have been part of those conversations as well. We are part of the formal group. There's I think by statute, it had identified several agencies that are part of the task force or working group, and I believe the first formal meeting will be in early December that we will be a part of. But in the meantime, we have been convening sort of informally and sharing information, and are keeping open lines of communication on all the work that she's planning on doing. She has now one staff member with, I think, a second and third coming on board soon.
Great. We're going to go to comms.
Great.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
steal your
we're
chair.
So we just wanted to share, my name is Vincent, I'm the Executive Director for Communications and Marketing. We just wanted to share a couple of videos that we've published in the last couple of months, and then share some highlights on press and digital trends from, I think, the last maybe 6 months. We'll start with the fun video stuff. We have this. So this is a video that we produced to commemorate the 400-year anniversary of the first arrival of enslaved Africans in the U.S. 1619, Brittany has led a lot of that work for the commission, and we sort of put this video together to sort of tell the story of slavery in New York City. So
I'll just also add, following in kind of the excellent project by Nicole Hannah-Jones. I'm sure a lot of you saw that in the New York Times, the 1619 Project. We wanted to also have something local to New York City to talk about how 1619 is also very relevant for the history of slavery here in New York City, and focus on what has happened here in New York City. So Brittany will probably talk about it in a little bit, about the panel presentations that we did here, and this video accompanied that.
(2019) marks 400 years since the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in what would become the United States. Starting in 1711, the British ran one of the colony's largest slave markets at what is today 74 Wall Street. Legal enslavement of people in New York City lasted for over 200 years until 1827. Though slavery was illegal in New York, the city continued to profit from the trade of cotton, tobacco, and sugar through its ports. At the same time, the city became a bastion for the abolitionist movement. It was home to a constellation of safe houses and churches that made up stops along the Underground Railroad. Once slavery was abolished nationwide in 1865, policies, practices, and violence continued to bar Black people from enjoying true freedom. But Black Americans resisted. Before abolition, Black Americans led uprisings and literacy campaigns. In the Reconstruction era, Black people ran for public office. And in the following centuries, there was ongoing organizing for the fight for liberation. Slavery and discrimination have had a lasting impact on Black Americans that continue today. Structural racial inequality heightened tensions among communities of color during the Great Depression. A 1943 uprising in Harlem became a flashpoint. Black residents were frustrated with overcrowding, segregation, and police brutality, common experiences for Black communities in the urban North. A year later, Mayor Fiorello H. LaGuardia founded the Mayor's Committee on Unity. The committee was created to restore stability and promote positive community relations. In the decades following, the committee became the City Commission on Human Rights. In 1962, it was empowered to enforce the New York City Human Rights Law. 2019 marks the 400th year since the first enslaved Africans were brought to the U.S. We also mark over 150 years since the abolition of slavery nationwide. But there is still so much work to do. As abolitionists warned, freedom is not the same as equity, and the Commission has embraced the fight for change. We are working to address anti-Black racism at work, in housing, and in public places. Through enforcement, policy, and public education, the Commission is challenging anti-Black racism in vital areas of life. The Commission and the City Human Rights Law exist to ensure that all New Yorkers, including Black New Yorkers, are treated with dignity and respect. Reach out to the Commission on Human Rights if you have faced discrimination.
So that is the original kind of video. We're actually working with a consultant to do some tweaking on it because there's been just a lot of interest. We showed this at the event that we had, and there's been a lot of interest in using this video in other contexts. So I wanted to give you all a sense of that.
Terrific. Can you access it on YouTube or Facebook?
So this is
Not
not
yet.
available yet. We're going to be making some
See a
changes.
sneak preview.
Yes, yes.
And the second video is available online. It is the story of the Law Enforcement Bureau's work with a transgender complainant.
And just to add to this, so Trans Awareness Week has just ended actually, and it culminates with what's called Transgender Day of Remembrance, really thinking about all the trans lives lost to discrimination and violence. And so we thought that this would be a good time for us to release this, to remind folks about, again, what we do in the city to combat transphobia and other types of discrimination against folks based on their gender identity and expression.
Oops, sorry.
The Commission on Human Rights is responsible for enforcing New York City's anti-discrimination law, which is one of the broadest and most expansive anti-discrimination laws in the country. So anyone who lives, works, or even visits the city is protected from discrimination under the law. A lot of my work focused on addressing gender discrimination. It's really important to uplift that transgender people in New York City and gender non-conforming people face discrimination Bonifacio came to us because he experienced two really serious incidents of discrimination. The first one occurred when he confided in a caseworker that he was transgender.
I was basically made to feel less than. Like, the exact words were, I was a liability. And all I did was indirectly out myself because of a question asked.
The worker responded by immediately telling Mr. Bonifacio that he was a liability and moving him from the hotel where he was staying, where he was fairly comfortable, to a much more institutionalized and less desirable shelter, where he felt so unsafe that he actually left within a period of days.
There's nothing wrong with being trans. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with what I did and, having to out myself. This was all the irresponsibility of that agency.
The second incident occurred when he was interacting with officers who repeatedly and intentionally misgendered him in front of other people.
If someone misgenders you or outs you, that's harassment. You're compromising my safety. You're outing me. You're outing my trans status. My gender assigned at birth is medical information. So I have to go to the commission after that.
When a member of the public files a complaint of discrimination, the commission's first job is to look into things and get to the bottom of what happened. The Law Enforcement Bureau found probable cause in favor of Mr. Bonifacio and then settled the case for emotional distress damages for Mr. Bonifacio. And then we also reached an agreement for the respondents to change their policies and practices to reduce the likelihood that other people would experience discrimination.
When it comes to the commission helping people overcome these cases of discrimination, they're basically helping these people overcome an obstacle that shouldn't exist in the first place.
I think it's so important that a government entity is right here in New York City is taking a stand and saying, we will defend you. We have your backs. The Commission on Human Rights doesn't just prosecute cases that start with a member of a public filing. It's important for the Commission to be out in the community and hearing from the community. Individuals aren't always at a place where they can step forward and be a named complainant. And we then can step into their shoes and be the complainant and make sure that rights are being enforced without putting an individual in that vulnerable position and having to say, yes, I was discriminated against.
It only takes one case. This is all these people needed, is one case.
I hope that transgender New Yorkers who face discrimination will call the Commission on Human Rights and will know that we can stand with you in getting relief, in saying this is not acceptable, and that the Commission can be here to help you fight back.
So these are obviously just two examples of two different areas, but we have found that video and visual have been such great ways, especially in the digital age, of reaching out to people. That's also why Dana and Vincent, maybe you could talk a little bit.
About, I'm just curious, in the video, did you deliberately not name the agencies?
Yes.
Yes. Because that was pretty striking.
Yeah. So, yeah. Do you want me? I'll let.
I can. So it was an HRA DSS related case. HRA, Human Rights Administration. So
Human Resources.
Human Resources. Oh my goodness. Human Resources Administration related case. There had been other press on it. And so as not to also, we didn't want the video to be looked at as us kind of throwing another city agency under the bus. What we thought was the real import of the video was less about who the respondent was than about kind of the facts around the case and folks' ability to get us. And we didn't want that to be the distraction, frankly.
But the officers in the second example, what was that about?
They were peace officers.
They were peace officers that are employed by HRA DSS.
I see.
Yeah.
And it was.
And it's still public information, so.
I was just curious, because it was pretty I was like, oh, they're just avoiding something here.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
Well, there's HRA, DSS, and Acacia, which is the private agency that was running the shelter for
Yeah, no, it just struck me when I was watching it.
Yeah, my only recommendation is both powerful videos. The only recommendation that I would make, and don't get upset with me, is I would try to produce a 1 minute out of the 3 minutes, because there's plenty of research
Yeah.
that people watch with 1 minute videos. When you do mass social media distribution, and then a link at the end to the website to the 3 minutes.
Yes.
It's more powerful indeed, but just something to keep in mind, because in our experience, we increase also our traffic
Yes.
when things are a minute, shorter.
Right. No, and we now have a fairly robust video library of different videos, commission related, and oftentimes we'll have a longer version and then a bite-sized version.
Right side, yep.
Yes. Kira.
And also, it was hard to see that this person's ability to have a place to stay and be safe was threatened. And it was kind of, it was difficult to tease that out in the video.
Okay.
So you focus on emotional distress, but it also threatened his right to shelter. And I think that is really what tugged at my heartstrings. And I would have focused on that more, because that placed his life in danger.
Yes, very good point. I agree with that.
We just looked at some of the numbers with the posts on the video, and just to share, the organic engagement on this post was 57%, which is the second highest out of any of the posts that we've done. It was second to tweets that we did with the MasterCard announcement of Acceptance Street.
I'll also, on this specific video, I'll also add that, or our video work generally, one, I think you all know, I take great pride in the fact that our staff is fairly representative of different communities in the city that we work with. So we do have several staff members that identify as being TGNC that also have put some input into the video, but notwithstanding that, really wanting to partner with and engage trans communities, especially during this week and for this particular topic. We hired a consultant who was also engaged in the video, Lala Zanel, who was formerly with AVP and is now at the ACLU. One, because I think it's really important that we're getting the input and engagement for the folks who are doing the work out in the world that are not necessarily affiliated with us. But two, that we're also, frankly, when we are contracting with different folks for our things, we're putting money back into communities that should be getting it because they are doing the work out in the world. But I just want to also parlay this into something that we're working on right now coming up because of the power again of video and visual. And so Dana and Vincent, if you could talk a little bit about our planned social media campaign to address anti-Semitism and to try to really put things out in the world, especially, I think, at this moment in time when we are just seeing, unfortunately, citywide an increase in violence against Jewish communities across the city.
Sure, I'll give a little bit of background on sort of our thinking behind it, and then Vincent can talk sort of the comms expertise. So we are thinking of sort of a dual-pronged approach here. One is to show imagery of a diversity of Jewish community, representative of a diversity of Jewish communities across the city. So, a visibly Hasidic man, a modern Orthodox woman, a man wearing a kippah, and then a Jewish person who represents more of the sort of the what some might not expect to be the diversity of Jewish communities in the city. So a Jewish person of color, and have sort of all four visuals. To speak to, and this would be on social media, so to speak to Jewish New Yorkers to see themselves in those pictures, but also to non-Jewish New Yorkers as sort of like stand with our Jewish communities that are diverse, that are not what you might expect, and sort of lift up their stories and like let's all come together to support this community that is particularly under attack right now. We understand that Hasidic Jewish New Yorkers are the ones who are being targeted right now, and many of them do not use social media, and so that really is not. We do not expect Hasidic Jewish New Yorkers to engage directly with that strategy. So another focus will be to place print-focused ads in Jewish newspapers in potentially both English and Yiddish, speaking more to us as what we can do for this community as be a resource. So less about standing up together, but more about we are a city agency working to combat anti-Semitism, and we are here. We've done that before. It was primarily in English in several Jewish newspapers, and we want to do that again, but kind of think through a little bit of what our messaging is given the situation right now.
You know, and folks might remember, like in 2017, after the murders of 3 Muslim New Yorkers in Queens, we did something very similar with I Am Muslim NYC, and so we want to again just engage folks in the same way. One, showing support for Jewish communities, and also letting folks know, you know, you can be liable for, you know, significant damages under our law in addition to any of the criminal prosecutions that might apply. So, any thoughts or questions on that? Terry?
I don't know how to frame this, but so the anti-Semitic issues have been arising in Staten Island, more prominently this last year than I have seen in my history. And we now have an anti-Semitism committee, Staten Islanders Against Anti-Semitism. We've been meeting for a year, and we just did our first public event on Sunday night, which your commissioners spoke at.
Yeah.
But what's hard to get a handle on is, what are the strategies for engaging the Gentile community? How do you talk to people? How do you diffuse things? How do you hear each other? Like the techniques, the actual nuts and bolts of to prevent things from happening. You know, if somebody can hand me a curriculum, I've been going to these. I take workshops everywhere I can, slip away when nobody knows where I am. On, you know, teaching tolerance and doing this and doing that. And a lot of it is school-based. It's not adult-based, community-based. Yeah. And I can teach community organizing, but I don't know how to teach how to do that kind of. It's more that it's not really conflict resolution. It's more getting through the barriers and the perceptions that people have.
Right.
And that would be like a great preemptive strike if we had those kind of materials that could be passed on to local groups and worked with to prevent things from happening. This past week, there was this distribution of literature in Staten Island. I don't know if anybody saw it, but it was really pretty scary stuff. And all that stuff leads to something happening. It's like you feel like something brews underneath, but you can't put your finger on it. And how do you prevent this? How do you talk to people?
Right. Frank, do you want to talk a little bit about?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frank Joseph. I'm Deputy Commissioner for the Community Relations Bureau here at the Commission. So we actually, a couple of weeks ago, October 28th, we have a new Jewish Communities Liaison. His name is Jonah Boyarin. He's actually at a conference right now, and that's the reason why he's not at this meeting. We would like for him to come so everyone could be familiar with him. He has met with some of the commissioners already, and we hope he can meet with everybody else.
I just as a point of clarity, we had somebody in that role prior to him. It's not a new role at the agency, but that person left, and so this is somebody new filling in that role.
Filling in, yes. And so Jonah actually comes from Jews for Economic and Racial Justice, and he has done workshops and trainings on how to combat anti-Semitism and just in general talking about Jewish communities. And so that's something here at the Commission that we are working on. We have someone with that expertise, someone who understands the language, who understands, you know, the wide spectrum of Jewish communities, different members of Jewish communities. So we are doing that. We also, Jonah, Dana, and I, as a follow-up to a meeting that Dana had with the Office to Prevent Hate Crimes, we are talking about some community-focused approaches on how can we, talk about anti-Semitism and talk about, because oftentimes what we're seeing, and this is very unfortunate, is marginalized communities oftentimes are, the ones who are attacking each other. And so now there becomes this dynamic where one marginalized community now is being arrested, right? Because they attacked another marginalized community. And for us, seeing folks interact with, criminal law enforcement is something that is disheartening because they are already marginalized. And we know that when they interact with criminal law enforcement, that the odds are not on their side. And so we are looking at some restorative justice approaches. I know that Jonathan has been very supportive of that. How can we do that with Jewish communities? We're thinking about how can we do that with communities in general. So having a sit down with Jewish leaders, Black clergy, Latinx clergy, across the entire spectrum as well. And so we are talking about that. We know there are some elected officials that have been really successful at doing some work in their particular communities to address this. So how can we, perhaps work with their offices to kind of leverage their relationships with intergroup relations and also their experience in doing this work so that we can also do it citywide and borough by borough. But the training is something that we are currently working on. From the training, we will have some material after that, and we are talking about some community-focused approaches as well. And we're trying to tee that up because it is a priority for the agency.
Yeah, no, first of all, I really want to thank not just the commissioner, but the staff for your immediate responsiveness to some concerns that I had raised just a few weeks ago, and the amount of work that's just been done in the last couple of weeks has been incredible. I think Jonah is the perfect person at the perfect time to come in and really, the commission, I think, the more I thought about this, is really uniquely positioned to play a key role here. A productive role, one that I am confident that over time will move the needle in the right direction. I'm absolutely sure of it. I think education is at the heart of it. Communities, marginalized communities living side by side is not a new phenomenon in this city. It has occurred for a half a century with certainly some flashpoints, but relative calm over, we'll say, a 5-decade period. That calm has been disrupted in the last 18 months, and there's a lot of attention being paid as to why. And I think that if we can, given the resources that I think we're dedicating here, I fully expect that a year from now we will, and I'm confident that we will be having a different conversation, and I believe, again, that the commission is uniquely positioned, more so than any other agency in city government, to play a role here where we see some real success. So I just thank you, Commissioner, for your attention to this matter, to the staff who's been fantastic and on this from the moment the issue was raised. And again, I see some real progress here. Dana, just one thing.
Yes.
Believe it or not, more Hasidim are on social media than you think. Mm-hmm. And I can show you 25 different accounts that had thousands of followers. Mm-hmm. By the way, this is very important because communicating with this community has been a challenge. Has been a challenge, but that has changed with the advent of Twitter. Yeah. But absolutely take out the ads as well. I don't want to talk you out of that. Continue to do that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will just also add that, if I had to name right now kind of the top 3 initiatives in the agency that are active and very much engaging all areas of the commission, this is one of them. Yeah. And it's very tied into kind of the active work that we're doing right now to kind of capture and name and message on the restorative justice work that we are doing and that we are pretty much amping up at the agency. We've been funded by Trinity Wall Street on some of the ways that we are edifying our internal restorative justice knowledge and know-how. We are actively seeking other funding to increase that knowledge and know-how, and for commissioners in the room who could be helpful in talking to us about our ideas on that, we would really enjoy that. And we have been actually actively engaged with the DA's offices across the city. One, primarily looking at, again, the increased violence against Jewish communities, and then also talking to them about thinking of our agency as a partner and talking to them about kind of alternatives to what they're looking at. And I know a lot of them have already been engaging with the Center for Port Innovation of thinking about ways that they could be thinking restoratively, especially in situations where folks who are, committing hate crimes or committing acts of bias are also coming from vulnerable communities. But we are really, I think, filling a void in that space, and more to come on that. For any of the commissioners who are interested in talking to us more about that, being a part of that work, or helping us get funding in that space, please let me know, because it's happening right now. This is where the work is happening.
I had a thought and a question. So one was, to what extent are you guys framing this work as restorative justice explicitly?
We are. I mean, that's why I'm saying this is kind of the active work that we're doing. And I mean, not to kind of put the cart before the horse on this, but one of the things that we're thinking about in the next few months is we've been talking to some of the kind of RJ-related experts in different areas, mostly in the criminal legal space, the DV space, the educational space, etc. I think it's fairly new to be thinking about it for purposes of civil legal enforcement, outside of like family law, outside of DV. And so one of the things that we are kind of engaged in putting together, and Elizabeth Bender is here too from the Office of the Chair. She's been pointing on this. She had worked at the Red Hook Justice Center in the past and had been engaged in other RJ-related initiatives. We're putting together kind of a name to be imagined, but kind of our own kind of internal board on RJ-related work. And part of that will be creating the internal capacity to be doing some peacemaking circles, to be doing some RJ-related circles, and also to be working with schools, housing providers. We see this as being a huge thing, especially in the housing space, with tenant-on-tenant harassment or post effects of gentrification and displacement, and in other spaces where, again, we're talking about bias attacks that could be looked at as a hate crime, but could also have some significance under our law.
And my understanding is that a lot of times with some of the low-level offenses too, that you have mental health issues. And I assume that that's a piece of what you guys are.
Yes,
We
this
should
is part of the
definitely connect
discussion.
on this
Okay,
offline.
yes.
We're doing a lot of work on this exactly.
Okay,
So.
okay, yes, that would be great. Okay. Yeah, Kathy.
Just so I just don't forget something. Well, happy to share our list of restorative justice vendors.
Great.
You might have the list already, but just to compare this.
Liz is like, thank you. Okay. Great, thank you. Okay.
So believe it or not, we were on comms. Yeah. Should we continue with?
Well, I was just saying, just for purposes of time, I already talked about it, we're just going to quickly go through. I just want you to have aware of kind of what the big precedents have been on the commission and the work. Yes, I understand.
So earlier this year, we celebrated milestones around damages and penalties. We got some coverage in Morning Edition WNYC. We talked about the immigration fascist national origin guidance. Carmelin was on CNN's Shmerkonish, sort of clarifying some misinformation about that guidance. Also got some coverage in other community ethnic press. The hair work that we've been doing continues to generate interest. We worked on a video with the New York magazine, The Cut, and then also got coverage on the settlement with Hirschberger Durham salons in the Times.
And something we'll talk about in a moment.
Got it. And then this was a couple of other clips highlighting our source of income discrimination work. The Bonifacio case about the video you saw earlier, as well as coverage in Romper about our pregnancy and caregiver discrimination report released
July.
Mm-hmm. And then just very quickly, some website trends, hitting it out of the park, and then Facebook growth and social media growth also doing really well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sana, you're up.
Hi, I'm Sapna Raj. I'm the Deputy Commissioner in charge of the Law Enforcement Bureau, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our considerations that the important ones. Some of them actually you've seen in the videos that were shown, and some of the things that, later things that Vincent just talked about. But I want to first start off with our source of income work, which I think we've done some amazing work recently. We have a source of income unit that was started almost 2 years ago. And the most interesting part of our work, I think we have a lot of litigation going on, but I think the most interesting part of our work is the set-asides. So what that means is that when we have a landlord we think has violated the law by not accepting folks who have vouchers, we work out a deal with them where they will accept a certain number, set aside a certain number of units for folks with vouchers. And then we work with advocacy groups and other groups in the city to tell us who is actually looking for housing and has been denied housing because they have a voucher. And then we match that person with the landlord who has agreed with us to have set-asides. So it actually helps people to find housing when they've struggled with finding housing. And we've been actually quite successful with that, and we're continuing with it, in including that in our conciliation agreements. So when we litigate and we conciliate and we settle with landlords, we say, okay, you're a big landlord, now you need to set aside a certain number of units that will be available only for people with vouchers.
I just want to, this is huge for folks that are not totally following. This is pretty huge. And again, we're doing so much restorative work, we think, in the agency. I think this is also a big part of that in the housing space. And that's why just the recognition that we're doing it like with the hair salon, hopefully, so folks saw some of that news and looked at the restorative work in that space. There's this in the housing space. That's really why we want to bundle this together, because for other agencies and other jurisdictions, we want folks to know it's possible. Yeah. It's possible to do the work. Sorry. I'm just so excited because I think this is a huge thing to do.
So I'll next talk about the Sally Hirschberger settlement that we reached, which was the hair salon that was discriminating against employees by telling them that they could not wear their natural hair the way it was. They had to change their hairstyles. And so in that particular one, the complainants themselves settled separately, but we got $70,000 in civil penalties from the salon. We got them to change their policies. We got them to do training not only on the law, but also on bias, in general, and to train employees on styling and cutting natural hair, which is what they were not doing, in addition to discriminating against their employees. They also are going to start a program where they're going to mentor student stylists from different hairstyling schools within the city, and also make sure that they are recruiting more people who are underrepresented, including people of color at their salons.
And I just want to be explicit on some of those points. So one is it requires them to actually partner with hairstyling schools in the city that specialize in styling black hair. And that school will be training their hairstylists on how to actually style black hair, which is so important in this space. I mean, if you look at some of the employment-related issues in other areas, there's reports of even celebrities saying, hairstylists don't know how to style my hair. Yes. They just don't know how to do it. So that's one thing, but then also they're partnering with those schools so that they can take in their interns from those schools. So schools who specialize in black hair will now have the opportunity to send interns to this fancy, huge salon to get the training that they get there and the name and the prominence of that, and then after successful completion of those internships, be hired by that school. And to some of the training and the workshops that Sapna was talking about, it requires that the salon partner with a racial justice organization so that they could work together on fighting race discrimination from within the beauty industry. So I'm so excited about this because this to me is like real restorative work. We're talking about the communities that have been affected by this type of discrimination. I'm so excited. Okay.
But it also goes back to that video you showed us in the history of the commission. It's really powerfully connected to the whole lineage of what we're doing.
It's restorative because you're creating and rebuilding relationships.
Yes.
That's central.
And giving opportunities to folks who do not have those opportunities.
And reparative, I think, too.
Yes, so there's
Yes.
both. It's not one or the other.
So next I'll tell you a little bit more about the Bonifacio case, which was in the video with Mr. Bonifacio, who was not allowed to seek shelter where he wanted to seek shelter. And I think you're very right that housing is so important, because when to me, my history is in housing work, and so I think that is when you're denied housing, that's worse than actually after food and clothing. I think housing is the most important thing that all of us want, a roof over our heads. In that particular case, it was $55,000 in damages to Mr. Bonifacio, $10,000 in civil penalties, and that the agency agreed to change their policies so that anyone who comes to them can pick the shelter that best fits their gender identity, that they identify with. And that they will be addressed by the pronouns that they prefer, that it doesn't matter what the medical records show or what the person, whoever is addressing them, will wanted to address them as. They have to be addressed by what the preference is here.
So this was HRA?
Yes.
I thought their policies already stated those things.
So they did, but
I've worked with them for years on this issue.
Well,
Okay.
maybe, but policies are different from practice.
Yes.
And it was also an agency, and it was a company that was working with HRA, so it's Acacia. Right.
Oh,
right.
so that
they-
wasn't made clear earlier.
Right, so
Can
actually,
you release the name of that company?
Acacia.
Oh.
Acacia, yeah.
No.
So we actually had another agreement with them on a separate thing that came through testing, which had the same issue, that they were not accepting people who were trans. And so we reached another agreement with them. That was earlier, so I'm not going to cover that here. Acacia also has to have an LGBTQI staff specialist who would deal with housing issues with folks who needed help with that. Of course, training, we always ask for training. They can't ask for proof of gender, and monitoring. So we have monitoring with them to see how many complaints they get for a period of 3 years. So that's I'm sorry, Jeff.
No, I think if you don't monitor, not in 3 months or 6 months, but at least 2 or 3 years,
Yes.
we know what happened many times. People go back to,
Yeah.
I love that.
I know that we are beyond our time. I want to be respectful of people's time. A lot of our discussion that we had planned for later on has actually happened within the course of the meeting. So I want to allow, if folks have other questions that they want to raise generally before we conclude, I just want to be respectful of people's time. Anything else?
Yeah, I just wanted to congratulate the commission, the work that was done with the 400 years. I took my students to Ghana, to the door of no return for the 400 years. And it was a really, awesome experience to see this place and to visit those castles and to understand even deeper what happened there. But what I really wanted to share is my transgender student was separated from his mom at the airport in Morocco because he is a boy, but his documents had a different, and that was really bad, because he's only 11 years old, and the officer didn't consider that this was a minor. It was just because he was, transgender. I still feel choked up about it when I talk about it, because it was almost as if, to advocate at that moment is to be arrested because you're obstructing something while this child is waiting on the line, where his mother is already getting ready to board the plane. I don't know how we do that, with the passports, and how does that work?
Jurisdictionally, it's like it's so difficult, for us to do anything about it, obviously, because it's covered by federal laws
I
and
know.
things.
How did it turn out for the How, did everything get resolved at the airport?
Oh, yeah, well, his mother was over here, and he was standing on the line unaccompanied by his mother, because once they knew that he was transgender, she told the mother, you go ahead. So now it's 10 people ahead, and she's still waiting for her son, that is 10 years old, to join the line. It was horrible. It was just horrible. It's just so deep the discrimination goes, that even, the children carries that weight. And we were like, our hands were tied. Our hands were tied. And you would think Morocco, a different place, a different consciousness, no. It's a cruel world.
Thank you for sharing that. Remind us that, it's a global
Yes.
from, transphobia,
Yes.
homophobia, and so on. I just want a request to Dana and to the commission, if you could share with us, hearings that, you think are important for us as a commissioners to know, that you share it with us, and share this as a distribution list, and saying, upcoming hearing on this, that we're gonna be testifying.
Okay.
Because I truly believe that those are opportunities not only to hear from you, from the team, but also, other folks that will be engaged, like the one coming up next Wednesday, right before Turkey Day.
That's
Or
great,
tofu,
yes,
or tofu if
absolutely.
you're vegetarian.
Thank you.
I think it's so important to both do what you're doing in creating these new approaches and rethinking new interventions. But it's equally important to document it so that we can share it. So I'm curious as to, are you going to be doing any kind of report on restorative reparative approaches, or is there a video? Is there something that can be then shared out to the rest of the world? So that
Yes, so this isn't part of this is what consumes Liz's day and why she's in my office probably a quarter, 3/4 of my day. But really, part of it's, we have so many thoughts on what we can do. Part of this is funding driven, part of it is not. So one, I'll engage with you more on that person, and anyone who's interested in talking to us about this stuff. And also, this is gonna be an ongoing topic for us. If we had more time at today's meeting, we would have talked at greater detail about what we're trying to accomplish in this space. So, but the short answer, yes, because we want this to become something very, yes, I mean, we think so. So we think so, yes.
So I know we're coming to the end, and actually in between these quarterly meetings,
Yes.
I would love to have opportunities to talk more with both staff and also fellow commissioners of ways we can help out. Because the challenge, I guess Jonathan was saying, we're at a certain point in time, is pretty big task. But some thoughts. One is, I really love the media and all that work that you're doing, because the more you can get that into the public realm through YouTube or whatever, and the media covering it. But secondly, this thing about the conflict between some of our communities that may be coming up.
Yes.
We've seen that, I certainly was at the commission during some pretty awful stuff. And when it gets to that point, it's just really hard to have any kind of dialogue. So the more we can help out as commissioners and also working with you to maybe strengthen some of those, we were talking about that.
The newer commissioners do not know this yet, but so we are very active in reaching out to folks on the commission on these different areas between the different meetings. That's why it's so great to have such a diversity of folks from different communities and doing different work. But I would say in addition to that, if folks have interest in specific things that we mentioned, which is why we try to kind of give a flavor of the things that we've been working on, if folks have specific interest in particular initiatives or areas, please let me know. Copy Edwin on them, because then we'll know we'll definitely include you in those conversations. Terry, did you want to say something? Oh. Well, it is now 12:58. I thank you for your patience since we're running over. And I am going to then conclude this quarterly commissioners meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.